Yeah, it does seem that way. I was interviewing a cardiologist a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned about how it's so ingrained in the culture right now, the low-fat diet. And he said one of the main problems was dietary recommendations that come through the hospitals. That when people
Oh yeah.
are that they have certain government dietary regulations, dietary guidelines, and written in there still is this low-fat diet thing for patients who are suffering perhaps heart disease or other maladies. But that has been ingrained in the hospitals, and that's one point where it would take some sort of change in order to get everyone to start thinking a little bit better about low fat versus the high carb or high protein diet.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's what happens is in this game, everyone begins to believe it. You've got nutritionists, you've got dietitians, you've got, in hospitals, you've got health workers everywhere. Everyone starts pushing it to the point that everyone believes it has to be true. And nobody, with the very few exceptions, like myself, go back to look at the original data to see what it was. Like, what did we base this belief on?
right, but
And
in the last few years, since 2002, since you wrote that very famous article, it seems as though every study I've read invariably points to the low fat diet as being unhealthy, and that the Atkins type or South Beach type diet is far superior, not only for losing weight, but for maintaining health. And I mean, that's a long time. We're talking 6 years in that intervening
right.
time, and it still seems there's a huge societal resistance. Who do you find as the most receptive and least receptive to what you've written about as far as what you found with the low-fat diet and how it is potentially very bad for people? Who, like, what segments of society have shown the most resistance to your idea?
Well, doctors. When I
Doctors,
lecture
really?
on this, yeah, well, again, the problem is, well, they have a line, they have a way of rationalizing the last 6 years of evidence, which is, we never said it was low fat to begin with, and that's advice from 30 years ago. So now we know that there are good fats and bad fats and good carbs and bad fats, and we don't recommend low fat, even though they still actually do recommend low fat. And what we recommend is diets that are high in monounsaturated fats and omega-3 fatty acids and, eating a lot of fish. So by changing the goalposts, this idea that a healthy diet now is a Mediterranean diet, and that can be a high-fat diet. So now we've changed our definition of a healthy diet, and it doesn't really matter if we got it wrong for 20 years because now we have it right.
Mm.
And they don't really ask themselves, well, how do we know we have it right, or are we making the same mistakes today in terms of the quality of our science that we were making 30 years ago? Are there actually clinical trials to support what we're saying, or do we just base it on bad epidemiology? And then the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, they still see, fat is basically a dietary evil, and complex carbs, green vegetables, fiber, carbs with fiber in it, fruit as inherently healthy. I think they have this sort of Garden of Eden complex, which is they can't imagine Adam and Eve, Adam like hunting down an antelope,
Sure.
maybe, killing it with his bare hands and
Sure.
feeding Eve. So we had to have eaten copious fruits and vegetables throughout evolution, and they have to be really good for us, and so we have to say that carbohydrates are good for us and fat is bad for us.
Well, anthropology would say that we did eat a lot of meat when we were out there hunting and gathering. It would seem.
Oh yeah, well but then the argument is it must have been lean meat. So we
Oh,
could still keep our low-fat diet because they assumed that what we were eating was just, sort of lean muscle meat and nothing else. Again, they don't actually bother to read the anthropological literature to see that carnivores in general eat the fattest portions of the animals first, and
sure.
then leave the lean muscle meat for the scavengers.
Yeah, more energy
It's
density there, right?
Well, they're going for the fat.
Sure.
They're going for the richest source of, vitamins, probably.
Yeah, and one interest group that seemed to, which really threw me for a loop, that would be so publicly against any, challenge to the low-fat diet is the Center for Science in the Public Interest. Okay, they have science in their name, and you'd think that they could review the literature and find that the low-fat diet is almost complete bunk as far as losing weight and maintaining health. Yet, are they still, to this day, so adamantly against what you've written about?
Well, we don't talk to each other. they went after me after the 2002 article because, but yeah, they were the sort of foremost public interest group advocates for low-fat diet in the 70s. I mean, this guy Michael Jacobson, who runs it, is a fanatic, and he perceives, eating fat in the diet is akin to smoking cigarettes or shooting up heroin. I don't know. I mean, it's really, so they put themselves in a position where there's really no going back from the kind of pronouncements that they've been making over the years.
So that could be a problem. Some people have been so adamant, so public, and so striking in their positioning, so strident that it's extremely difficult to go back and say I was wrong.
Well, if you say I was wrong, then the public is likely to say, well, how do we know you're not wrong now? It's like any politician. But simultaneously, the fallback position is, okay, well, we said low fat, but what we meant was low saturated fat. And now, that's low trans fat too, since trans fats are kind of a saturated fat. So we always meant low saturated fat. And when you get rid of the saturated fat, you're just going to eat a lower fat diet in general. So there's always a way to rationalize their beliefs and come out of it looking like you knew what you were talking about.
I see.
One of my problems, people keep saying, well, what do you think about complex carbohydrates? And I don't like the term because back in the 70s and 80s, a simple carbohydrate was sugar.
Yeah.
And a complex carbohydrate were strings of sugars, in a molecule. So those were starches. So potato was a complex carb and sugar was a simple carb. And now a simple carb is a starch, like a potato, and a complex carb has fiber in it. So they could say, well, we always recommended that people eat complex carbohydrates, but they neglect to say that the
definition
what they meant by the term complex carbohydrate has been shifted so that they don't have to claim that a potato is a health food anymore.
Sure, I understand. Now, I would tend to think, though, with the open nature of information nowadays, being it's so accessible on the internet and so many good reference sites and so many publications, so many dietary studies, nutrition studies that would back more of the Atkins type, Southeast type, more high protein diet, you would think that more of these groups would come around. Is that the case?
I think they slowly will. I think they're just doing it in a way that doesn't
so that they can
make
save
them
face.
look like idiots.
Okay.
Yeah, so like the American Diabetes Association will now say, well, a low-carb diet for diabetes is safe for 6 months. Now, by the way, when they put diabetics on low-fat, high-carb diets, they had no data whatsoever to show that this was a reasonable thing to do. And
it would seem like, based on most of what I've read, it's the worst thing to do for a diabetic.
Well, that's what you would think, because the primary problem with diabetes is metabolizing carbohydrates. So it went against, almost you could argue a century of sort of anecdotal experience treating diabetic patients, but this is what they did. But once they put people on this diet, once the high-carb diet became the standard for diabetics, how do you turn around now and say, well, wait a minute, it turns out that if we put diabetics on a low-carb, high-fat diet, they actually do extremely good. They lose weight, their diabetes gets under control, they need less insulin.
Yeah.
But what they say now is it's a healthy diet for 6 months, which is like the strictest reading of the existing clinical trials.
Sure.
And they ask themselves nothing about why it should even be considered an unhealthy diet. The same thing happens when they talk about weight loss. The American Heart Association has this argument that a high-fat, high-protein, low-carb diet is a fad diet. And they keep saying it over and over again. This is a fad diet. The Atkins diet is a fad diet. Whereas one thing I did is I just went back into the medical literature, going back again to the